Great. So today we're going to try to get through a bunch of different items today, mostly focusing on implementation of a lot of the laws that have recently been passed. You'll be getting a recording of this conversation, all the resources shared in the chat, the slides tomorrow or Wednesday after we're done. We did block off 90 minutes for the conversation today because we're covering so many things, but please keep the questions coming and let's see if we fill up that 90 minutes. We're going to have a quick DC state of play, and then we're going to jump into a discussion of a bunch of these different pieces of legislation that have passed recently. And now I think I'm passing it to Caitlin to describe the Jamboard that we're going to be using to capture some really important pieces of context and questions and things like that from all of you.
Thank you, Thomas. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here and see everybody. We will, I'll drop the link to the Jamboard if there's bit.ly, so you can grab it quickly, but I'll also drop it into the chat momentarily. It's pretty straightforward. We have the beginning just has a couple of quick links if you want to copy and paste and just have those. They'll also be shared in the slide deck, and we'll capture links that we all share today in the chat in the slide deck and send them all around. So you don't need to worry about that. And the next page there's a standing page on page 2. Thank you, Kathy, for dropping the link. So page 2 it's just for questions, ideas, notes. As things come up, feel free to ask the presenters. Feel free to share what you've got. Drop it in the chat, ask out loud, or share any notes here if it's not something that needs an urgent answer. We're really trying to collect questions, get people information and answers, and share as much info as we can. And then the next page is, and this is just for anyone to drop stickies in, and the next page where we are continuing to collect examples as a coalition, and now the White House Office of Public Engagement is also looking for examples of how states and localities are leveraging the funds and using the funds to support older youth and opportunity youth. So if you've got an example from your state or you know of one that's worth sharing, you can drop it in here. Ideally, add your email and your name so we can reach out to you with questions and pass it on to the White House. But if you're not comfortable, you can also email it to me. My email is in this slide, caitlin@forumfyi.org. And yes, unfortunately, you won't be able to click the links in the Jamboard. We will share them in the slide deck at the end, but you can copy and paste them if you want to from the first slide. But don't worry about any of these. These are really just to have as we're going through if you want to refer to them. We'll put all the active links you need to have during the conversation into the chat so you can click it. Thank you all. So post questions in there, share stories, share ideas, uplift local lessons that we can share out with other states and other localities. Thank you.
Great. And I'm being reminded through some direct messages here. We will have time at the end of the conversation. Now, we always set aside time for announcements and try to have some time for some kind of open discussion. So if you have something that you want to share with the group, once we get to that time, just raise your hand. And there's a whole team of us kind of co-facilitating this conversation. So we'll try to keep an eye out and make sure that we get to everybody. I think we're going to a quick DC State of Play update from Joanne.
Thanks, Thomas. And hey, everyone. So great to be with you. I'm Joanne Paanya. I'm the Director of Advocacy at the Forum for Youth Investment. Pronouns are she, hers. So we'll make this quick. I know that we have a jam-packed agenda today on the State of Play. So we'll talk a bit about FY23 appropriations, where things are at, where things will land, and then also just thinking about broadly how we can all start planning for the upcoming 118th Congress. So folks might recall that a continuing resolution was passed just last month, noting that this is a short term and that it'll expire on December 16th. You'll see the voting record there for both chambers. We're fast approaching midterms, and once folks come back after the midterms in December, they do have a very tight window to make sure that all of the priorities that we've been lifting up throughout the year get included in FY23 appropriations. I've heard from at least one person who is just anticipating we'll see if appropriations gets punted into the next Congress. But I do think there's a larger appetite for just wrapping it up at the end of this year so that folks have a clean slate ahead of the next Congress in terms of leveraging priorities.
let's see, maybe any quick questions, clarifying questions on anything Joanne said there, just drop them into the chat or raise your hand. Sort of a quiet month, so we're spending less time on this than we usually do. Okay, just wanted to check. Okay, I guess I can quickly tee this up. We're going to be kind of running through portions of several different laws that are relevant to opportunity youth. I think starting with the Inflation Reduction Act, and I'll try to keep things moving here. I think Joanne, you're up.
Thanks, Thomas. Can we go to the next slide, please? And the next one after that. So I'm really thrilled that we have this time together to talk through and walk through the opportunities that are before us connected to the Inflation Reduction Act. And so specifically talking about the $3 billion as part of the Environmental and Justice Block Grant. And before we dig in further, just wanted to share an overview of the Inflation Reduction Act and how we essentially got here for the opportunities before us. So folks might remember that the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, passed over the summer. And specifically, there is a $3 billion block grant that's upcoming as part of the Environmental and Climate Justice Block Grant that will be rolling out. We'll apologize as we initially had some speakers plan to join us. Unfortunately, they won't be presenting today, but they are working on some incredible resources based on some legal research that's coming from the team at Harvard's Environmental and Energy Law program. So we'll be sure to share that out once it's available as part of advancing our federal priorities to benefit opportunity youth. So did want to start off with an overview. Here you'll see on the screen the EPA as the implementing agency for the climate-related provisions of the IRA. And then within the EPA is a newly formed programmatic office called the Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights. So essentially, as the agency has been reformatting and restructuring to really meet the needs of communities and directly impacted individuals throughout the country, they're receiving these federal funds to really restructure and also making sure that the implementation and rollout of federal funds are going out the door to benefit communities across the country. Overall, within the legislative text of the of the Inflation Reduction Act was this $3 billion block grant. And you'll see when it's broken down by segment, there's $2.8 billion that will be available for disadvantaged communities and community-led projects. And then also $200 million that will be available for technical assistance. You'll see that we've noted that these programmatic funds are meant to serve and target disadvantaged communities. And then also flagging who's eligible specifically for this particular grant. It's states, tribes, municipalities, and nonprofits. And any institutions of higher education that plan to apply for these grants will also be required to partner with these stakeholders in particular. I did want to share that according to at least one analysis, coming out of the IRA will be the creation of 9 million jobs. And so as we're thinking through together as the opportunity youth field and the movement in terms of the implementation of these funds, we can really think through together on what are some of the priorities that we want to lift up, such as youth engagement and youth employment in particular. I did want to share some updates that we've learned from the Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights in terms of what are their priorities as they are planning and structuring their specific office in preparation for the implementation of these grants. The first priority is that they're focused on increasing staffing for environmental justice in all of the regions. So there will be more opportunities for engagement with their regional staff and also convening partners in conversation in local areas. And so I can share that regional plans are in the process of being developed now. And then the second priority is that there will be a lot more information that will be shared in the next months and the next year about grants throughout EPA, especially this $3 billion environmental and justice block grant. We've been told that regional folks will also be on the front lines, and they'll be able to support, help, and navigate some of the barriers that comes with the process of applying for federal grants. So that's really exciting to hear. And then within this priority specifically, the OEJ ECR office is eager to really learn and hear from directly impacted individuals, community-based organizations, and communities overall. I've been connecting with their team and also with their federal contractor, and so this is a big priority for them. I do want to share, and I think this is a great highlight, that the Deputy Assistant Secretary specifically is particularly excited when it comes to engaging with community-based organizations. During one stakeholder call, he did share, having come from a community-based organization before he joined the federal government, that oftentimes he felt like an outsider looking in. So he and his team and the federal contractor who has been tasked with implementing this particular grant is very eager and excited to work with us as the Opportunity Youth Movement and as community-based organizations and as national organizations moving forward. So we really do have a key opportunity here to lift up our priorities as a field on youth engagement and also youth employment. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thought it'd be also key to share the makeup of the regional offices through the EPA here. As OEJ ECR is working with their federal contractor on the planning phases, they are deeply considering program structure. So did want to highlight that as they're thinking about the rollout and administration of federal funds when it comes to this particular grant, and also in terms of community engagement. And so I've learned one of the overarching goals of the work in rolling out the funds moving forward is that they're especially curious about how stakeholders are thinking about the current grant making process, whether that's from direct experience in applying for EPA grants, or if you have any innovative ideas that you'd like to share. And so as we're thinking about increasing equity and access, did want us to think about and encourage us to think about how to shape the implementation of this $3 billion block grant in two ways. Thinking about first and sharing of who has applied for any of these EPA grants in the past and who's thinking about applying for this particular EJ block grant through the EPA. And then considering the fundamentals of grant making as a potential grantee. So that is, what does access look like? What does the ease of navigation look like? What do requirements, user friendliness, opportunity, and relevance look like in terms of applying to federal grants, and also shaping what that can look like through feedback? So as folks are interested into digging into this further, please go ahead and share your thoughts into the Jamboard that was shared in the chat. We would love to work with you all and think through together how we can shape the implementation of these funds. And if folks are interested in connecting further, we'll be sure to share our emails at the end of the presentation as well for folks who want to think through strategies together moving forward. So I'll pause there for any questions from folks within this particular segment of our presentation.
Great. Joanne, can you see those stickies?
I do, thanks.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, great.
So first, is there a fast way to see deadlines for applying? Great question. I'll drop into the chat the page for OEJ's updates. This includes their stakeholder engagement calls that take place every month, as well as news on their grants moving forward. So I'll be sure to drop that into the chat before we wrap up. And then also flagging the bit.ly link that my colleagues had also shared there onto the sticky note as well. But great question. And if as folks think about any questions that might come up, please feel free to drop them into the chat and also into the Jamboard, and we'll work on responding to them.
Great. And there's maybe, you know, I think you touched on this a little bit, but maybe like how can those block grant funds be used? And then maybe just reminding everyone, is the notice of funding opportunities for this block grant out? Do we know when it's coming out? You know, where we kind of are with this piece.
Great question. So the notice for the funding opportunities is not out yet. I do know that the office is deeply in planning mode and also in listening mode. So even before the grants are rolling out, because they've received all this federal funding, not just for the $3 billion grant itself. Altogether, they've received an estimated $41.5 billion across all of the climate related provisions. They have a ton of funding coming their way. And so they are looking for feedback and for insight from folks working on the front lines in terms of your networks, your community-based organizations, and your partnerships. There are a number of things that the block grant can be used for, such as advisory committees consisting of directly impacted individuals and other climate-related priorities touching upon like pollution, emissions, and some of those areas too. I do think that this grant in particular is flexible, and so having shared that youth engagement and youth employment is something that the Deputy Assistant Secretary and his team are really excited for, are some of the ways that we can start thinking through together and collaborating together for an innovative proposal or even recommendations as they start thinking about implementation. And I can drop the specific language into the chat on the areas that the legislative text touches upon when it comes to what some of the dollars can be used for.
Great. That's those are the questions I'm seeing right now. Maybe we're ready to move on to our BCSA BSCA discussion. If Mary Ellen is here and ready to jump in.
I am. Thank you so much, Thomas. Hi, everyone. I'm Mary Ellen Wiggins. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm with the Forum for Youth Investment. So I'm a colleague of Joanne's. And I will just start off by saying I am so excited by the opportunities that are there in the Environmental Justice Block Grant, and was so excited to hear that really in-depth update. We are now going to get something that's kind of the polar opposite. This is going to be a little bit more rapid fire about some of the current funding opportunities and upcoming funding opportunities that are available that would be great ones to tap for older youth that are in the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. So everything I'm about to go through is in our online guide that's been posted in the chat. And you can find more detail there. You can find all the relevant links there, including links to current applications for funding. So you'll just see some of the highlights here in the slides, but please feel free to refer back to that guide as we go. And can we go to the next slide, please? Oh, thanks, Caitlin, for just dropping that link into the chat. Okay, so a couple of basics here. The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act was signed into law.
1 second, sorry.
That's okay. Let's just sign into law. I'll keep going as we go here. It was just signed into law in June of this year, June 25th. And among other purposes, it's really about reauthorizing, funding, and supporting different programs that are already in law and that are already happening that really support 3 different areas: access to behavioral and mental health services, to enhance school safety and security, and then to address gun violence in communities. So we're going to cover some of the funding opportunities, and we're going to use those 3 buckets as we go. Next slide, please. Okay, so a couple of things to know about this. The BSCA, as we call it for the acronym, includes both formula and competitive grants. And I think most people probably know, but just to do a quick overview, formula funds are when the federal government has an equation basically that they use. It says this state gets this much money because of its population or other factors. So there's no competition or anything like that. And then of course we have our competitive grants where states or localities or nonprofits or others have to actively apply in order to get funds. The funds are already flowing, as I said, and there are more to come. We're really going to look at 3 specific agencies here: SAMHSA, our Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration, the Department of Education, and then of course Justice. Next slide, please. Okay, great. So let's get into the money here. So we're going to start off with one that was just announced last week. So SAMHSA is offering planning grants for its Medicaid certified community behavioral health centers. So they're offering this money for planning grants, but what's really exciting about this opportunity is that the health centers are really something that's called a demonstration. So it's basically like a special authority to do things differently for a set amount of time. So these are demonstrations that are up to 4 years, and it gives communities the chance to really plan for how they would like to deliver comprehensive mental health services that are really targeted towards meeting all the needs of the community and really focus on adults with severe mental illness and children and youth with severe emotional disturbance. And what's really unique about this program is that instead of the usual process of somebody provides the service and then they get reimbursed by Medicaid, this is about receiving upfront funding based on the money that you think you'll need to provide the services. So it's actually meant to give folks money upfront, so you don't have to have the same ability to float the costs of what you're doing, staffing and all of those other things. And the payment rates are really meant to be very realistic. So often, of course, there's tension about whether Medicaid rates are sufficient. So this demonstration is really about getting at that problem in a different and holistic way. So I really encourage folks to look at these planning grants. There are going to be 15 of them, $1 million each. You have a year. The whole purpose of them is to plan for an application for that demonstration program. So if you get the planning grant, you're not guaranteed to actually get the special authority to participate in the demonstration. It's just your chance to really invest in putting together a stellar application that can meet the criteria. So if you go to the guide that's linked in the chat, you'll see in there a link to the Notice of Funding Opportunity. SAMHSA calls them NOFOs. And again, that is due on December 19th of this year. So it's coming up, but folks still do have time to really think about and plan for that. So the next, I'll pause there and see if there are any quick questions on that one because it's more complicated. Okay, great, we'll keep going. Moving on to education here. Education is releasing funding for the mental health service professional demonstration. So this is all about connecting institutes of higher education with schools that need more service and support for mental health on site. So this is really actually a great workforce opportunity to think about how we're connecting people to career pathways. They're really looking for innovative partnerships. So you have to be an LEA, a local educational agency, or a state educational agency, and you have to partner with an institute of higher education, so a college or a university. So there's some kind of partnership going there that really is bringing in a new pipeline of talent to serve the needs of students. So if you have been growing innovative partnerships in your community or interested in that, this is a great opportunity to get funding to support that work. Again, this is open and active now. And applications are due at the beginning of November, November 4th. Okay, and let's keep going to the next slide, please. All right, and to make things even more confusing, there is also a slightly different school-based mental health services grant, also from education. So these are the competitive grants. These are the ones you have to apply for. There's a total of $500 million, but the awards will range from $500,000, so much less than that, up to $3 million each year, but you keep the grant for 5 years. So that amount of money that you get keeps renewing for all of those 5 years. Applications are due on November 3rd. So again, coming up really soon, the state education agencies and local education agencies are again the ones who are eligible to apply here. And it's all about getting qualified mental health providers into school-based services and really working with places that have the most demonstrated needs. So again, a great opportunity to think about the data that you have on need. And moving on to a different type of funding altogether, this funding is not yet out on the street. This is the Community Mental Health Services Block Grant. This is from SAMHSA, again, and they have an additional $250 million that's going to be allocated by the end of this year. So that means those dollars will flow to states by the end of this year. And then those states are the ones who will be responsible for competitively making awards to localities, to nonprofits. So this is really the place to keep an eye on what's happening in your state if you're interested in applying, because the federal dollars, again, will flow automatically. These are really, it's a block grant, so these are really flexible dollars. This is a great place to look if you are doing a lot of cross-sector, cross-partner work, and you're looking for funds that can be used in a wide variety of ways. They're really all about supporting a very comprehensive community approach, and there is a focus on both youth and adults. And let's go to the next slide, please. All right, moving on to the schools here. Another grant that is currently live, this is also a formula fund grant, is the Stronger Connections grant. So again, those dollars have gone to the states And you can look up, there's a link in our guide, you can look up what allocation, what amount of funding has gone to each state. So you can already see what's available in the state where you are. And then of course the states will be awarding those funds to the local education agencies through competitions, and they can partner. So it's by tracking what's happening at the state level that you can actually access direct support where you are. States have a lot of flexibility in this area for what they want to do with the funds, but the Department of Education does provide some high-level guidance. There's a link in our guide to a letter that Education Secretary Cardona put out that has some of that guidance. And you see here the 3 priorities that they're really emphasizing for the competitions that states run: the comprehensive evidence-based strategies, student, family, staff, and community engagement, and equity and responsiveness. So this is also an area, because each state will be shaping their own competition and they are supposed to prioritize engagement. It could also be a really interesting place for advocacy at the state level to think about how you're asking your state education agency to engage and to develop the competition that they're going to have. All right, next slide. All right, 21st Century Community Learning Centers. This is $50 million being allocated to the states. Again, just a formula that goes out. And once again, these dollars have gone. And so if you go back to our guide, again, you'll see a link to all of the contacts, the names, phone numbers, emails for folks at each state who's responsible for this particular grant competition. So you can contact any of those people to find out those details. And of course, the states are the ones who'll be running the competitions for LEAs and for nonprofits. This is all about summer and after school programming. You'll see here on the slide some of the things that the dollars can be used for, but it's really a pretty good range of things. And let's go to the next slide, please. All right, and from the Department of Justice, we have funding for their Community Violence Intervention and Prevention Initiative. This funding has not been released yet, so more information to come. There are $250 million that will be available on a competitive basis. This is part of their comprehensive strategy for reducing violent crime that the agency created in 2021. So if you're looking for background information, that can be a good place to look at what that strategy includes. It's actually a collaborative process across DOJ and brings together a number of their offices. And the office that administers the grants is actually working in collaboration with the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, OJJDP. So that once grants are awarded, OJJDP actually takes over handling and monitoring and working with the grantees who are focused on youth and youth strategies. So it really is a place where Justice is trying to work collaboratively. And as you can see here, they've made these awards in the past under funding that they already had. And you can see the principles that they really focused on: support for highest need groups, community-centered and equity-focused, integration with public safety and public health, being strategic, data-driven, and performance-focused. So this is an initiative that Justice created. So it doesn't exist in statute anywhere, although this bill did actually give money to the initiative as a whole. Part of what that means is there isn't necessarily a lot of guidance about how the funds need to be used, which can be great room for creativity, and it's very helpful to have these principles. But as we'll hear in just a moment, it's also an important place for advocacy, because the lack of guidance can also mean that folks can use the funds in ways that are counterproductive. So this is a really important place to be in conversation with Justice and to make sure that these dollars actually go towards constructive and needed purposes that will support young people. We have contacted Justice, and we have a to-be scheduled meeting with them to be further briefed on this program. So we look forward to providing more information as we go. And I believe we have Clarence with us from CLASP to talk a little bit about some concerns that might be in this area and the lack of guidance. Clarence, are you here?
I am. Hello, everybody. Can y'all hear me? Great. Yeah, so my name is Clarence Oko. I use he, him pronouns. I'm Senior Policy Counsel at CLASP, working on issues related to the criminal legal system. As Mary kind of teed up, there are a couple of concerns that we have around this particular provision of the Safer Communities Act. First and foremost being the allocation of $250 million to the Department of Justice. We know that many of the programs funded by the DOJ in this space have led to the types of criminalization efforts within schools around the country that facilitate the school pushout crisis and have really deepened some of the kind of educational inequities that we all are deeply concerned with. In particular, there are some kind of more nuanced things that are happening at the community level that oftentimes are implemented under the guise of wanting to support students, but unfortunately can lead to criminalization. I want to just train your eyes on two particular pieces. One around the use of threat assessments and kind of collaborations between different agencies to identify young people who are labeled as risk or as threats to school safety. Oftentimes, these are kind of measures that are used to essentially predict which children are going to be most likely to enact some type of harm against themselves or to other folks. What ends up happening is that there are these threat assessment teams that are put into place in many communities that really center around a collaboration between law enforcement entities, school-based entities, and social service agencies. Unfortunately, what we've seen in a number of communities is that these threat assessment teams are really used as a pretext to drive criminalization. So these are you'll either see a data sharing agreement between them, you'll see these councils or other kind of bodies put together to essentially facilitate this process, but it's a deep concern. Again, we understand how important it is to be able to recognize young people who are in need of additional services or supports, but to leverage those data and to leverage those systems in order to criminalize young people is deeply concerning. And I think it kind of speaks more broadly to the lack of data privacy protections that are contemplated within the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. We know that unfortunately law enforcement entities are increasingly turning to novel technologies and new data sources in order to continue to expand processes and cycles of criminalization impacting young folks. This is a concern that we have at CLASP. It's something that we've seen through some of the work with our local partners down in Florida. They had a similar situation happen years ago with the Marjory Stoneman Douglas shooting. That tragedy unfortunately led to a very similar reaction in their state legislature, creating a legislative scheme that essentially allowed for the requirement of SROs in every school across the state of Florida. It also enabled the state to do social media monitoring of every student within Florida and required that schools and school districts set up these threat assessment teams. And what we've seen is that schools have basically begun to turn to predictive policing style interventions using those data, oftentimes under the pretext, under the guise of wanting to support students who are experiencing mental health crises. But in fact, it is used to enhance school-based arrests, suspensions, expulsions, and other forms of discipline. So with all that being said, I know that's a lot to throw at everyone, but just wanted to make sure that folks were fully aware that the DOJ funding in this area is deeply concerning to us and really does risk turning back the tide on a lot of progress that had been made in terms of confronting the school push-out crisis.
Thank you so much, Clarence. Those are such important points. And these are definitely things that hopefully all of us will be paying attention to and advocacy that we might do in this area with justice and educating them about what would need to go into guidance or what some of the concerns are. These are certainly topics that the forum will be bringing up to them before they put these dollars out. And also there are important things to think about as perhaps you or stakeholders that you work with consider putting together applications. It's a great opportunity to influence what goes into those applications to make sure that those things are actually constructive and healthy and supportive and equitable for students and don't just replicate racist criminalization that has always occurred up until this point. Thank you so much, Clarence, for raising those points. And at this point, I think I'm going to turn it over to Caitlin Johnson to just do a little bit of a quick overview for us on ARPA. Is that right, Thomas?
I see we have a couple of questions related to Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. So first, a good clarifying question from Ken on whether the focus is solely on minors or across all age groups. And then I think maybe if you could just clarify, you know, as both you and Clarence have alluded to, it's really important to shape implementation. You mentioned you're having a meeting. Are there other ways to weigh in with DOJ more formally, or how can folks on the call contribute to shaping implementation?
Thanks. I really appreciate those questions. Those are great questions. So no, the DOJ program is not solely focused on youth or minors. That is one population. And so, or at least how they've done it in the past, they've done it across both youth and adults. And OJJDP has ended up taking ownership of the grants that were made to entities that were proposing something that was focused on youth. So youth was one potential focus population. And so that does also mean that this is a great area to think across age groups, especially given how sometimes the federal government dissects age lines in ways that are not how we necessarily treat people programmatically. In terms of opportunities to engage DOJ, it's such an important question. And that's one where we're really going to have to gather more information. We're hoping in November to get to talk to DOJ and understand more about where they are and what their process might look like, because they really haven't announced very much to date. And so hopefully that opportunity will help us understand the best vehicles and avenues to really make a difference and understand what level of awareness and how they're thinking about these issues already. So I would say stay tuned. We would be very happy to keep folks updated and in the loop about what we find and what makes sense moving forward. Because again, as Clarence said, those are such important issues, and these funds really just must not be used to further criminalize young people.
Yes, great summary. And yeah, it's so tough to influence these kind of executive branch pieces that didn't come through an act of Congress and maybe don't have the same kind of requirements for stakeholder engagement. So yeah, hopefully we can get some more updates on how to shape that implementation going forward. Okay, I think that's all the questions I'm seeing. Caitlin, take it away.
Sure. This is a very quick update. I'll drop the link in the chat as well. But just a reminder that we've talked a lot about the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA. And we have a shared ARPA resource center here, the recording from the June webinar that all of you should have been invited to, and I know many of you were participated in. We've got that here. The recording to this webinar and the links that we've been sharing and talking about will also be saved here in this microsite. There's toolkits, there's tips for advocates and for policymakers. There's also a couple of handy videos, including one recorded by the young leaders who were part of Young People Address the Nation and Youth Action Hour. And then the other thing I just want to remind us that we have are the collection of bright spots. This is a companion to a series of profiles that the Children's Funding Project is doing, particularly focusing on younger youth. Our profiles are focusing on how states and localities are directing funds from ARPA to support older youth and systems involved youth. So there's some there, and we're hoping that if you look at those profiles, you'll see ways that you might still, in many places, there may still be windows to push and direct funds because of the multi-year funding. And as you look at those bright spots, hopefully it will also spark you to put some in the Jamboard on slide 3, sharing some of your local experience, what's happening locally and in your state that is using either ARPA or any of the other funding streams that we're talking about today. We, as I mentioned at the top of the hour, we and the Office of Public Engagement at the White House really are looking to collect and understand what's happening, what's possible, share what folks are doing so that others can replicate and learn from it. And then you'll see a list of handy links and resources to some really great tools out there, the Children's Funding Project and Brookings and other folks who are really doing great tracking in the space of ARPA and young people. And as always, please share any links or resources you have, and we can add them here and send them out. The link to the site is in the chat. And I think, Thomas, I'll turn it over to you unless there are any questions about ARPA and the potential still to push any of that funding. We know that most of the window has closed, but there are still spots and there's still ways in some states and localities for the funding.
Exactly. And just from the LA County example you cite with the Elevate program, these are all multi-year projects that are going to change and evolve. So, I mean, I know there's lots of opportunities to continue to shape how some of these dollars roll out. And it's really great to see the Children's Funding Project database is great. The Brookings ARPA tracker, all of these links will be in the slides. You'll get all of this after the call, but there's tons of great databases out there just to give you ideas for how people are using money. So, there's no lack of ideas out there. I'm just looking at the Jamboard.
But Thomas, can I chime in with one more quick point?
Oh, yeah.
I just want folks to know that the guide that we have online is going to be kept up to date. We were just making updates to it today, so you can continue to revisit that site that you're seeing now to see what new upcoming opportunities are, latest guidance links, things like that. And we'll keep a little box at the top that tells people what's new and fresh.
And that's the guide we're just looking at for the Safer Communities Act and IRA.
Yes.
Yep. That one.
And yes, Kathy's doing an amazing job of tracking which of these different web pages people are talking about.
Truly you are, Kathy.
Yes, I think we are. Yeah, I guess we're ready to go back to the slide deck, and yeah, I'm kind of gonna. Yes, I'm going to kind of tie together maybe a few of the things that we've been hearing about. You can go to the next slide, Kathy. Great. So I think, one of the things you've probably been hearing across these things that folks have been saying is that there's a lot of money that's out there right now. There's a lot of dollars going to agencies that might not know our issues super well to begin with, like EPA, Department of Transportation, Department of Interior on some of these bipartisan infrastructure law dollars, USDA, DOJ, you've heard about. So we need to really look for opportunities to shape how these laws are implemented. And one of the challenges, Mary Ellen's nugget earlier about, getting a meeting with DOJ and just trying to figure out how this, this funding stream that could have positive or negative consequences depending on how it's rolled out, kind of the complexities around trying to shape what that looks like, I think is really indicative of what's happening across all of these different agencies and different funding streams. I know I've been spending a lot of time just trying to work my limited contacts at EPA to find out how some of these dollars might go out. And I think a lot of us are just trying to kind of figure out, okay, so there's all this money out there and there are all these initiatives and goals. How can we affect whether this is really going to benefit young people? So I'm going to quickly drill down on one kind of minor seeming initiative, but that's a really tangible way that we can kind of shape something, and that hopefully can have some ripple effects out. So many of you might remember that last year, President Biden created the Justice 40 initiative through an executive order. You'll have the link, all the information about it will be in the slides when they go out. But basically, this was his kind of big climate change executive order. And the idea of Justice 40 was that all these federal agencies were supposed to look at the programs that they already have and any new money they might be getting and say, how can we drive at least 40% of the dollars toward disadvantaged communities, which weren't really defined in the executive order. So, okay, really big goal, right? It's like all these federal agencies, you have to say what kind of programs relate to environmental justice and how you're going to make sure that 40% of the dollars at least are affecting, are going to disadvantaged communities. And agencies have come back and then identified hundreds of programs. I think at EPA, it's like 73 programs or something, just at EPA. And then as was shared earlier, they're getting tens of billions of dollars just for like water infrastructure in some of these laws. So there's so much money out there. And you think about, I go back to water infrastructure because some of us have been, there has been some funding around opportunity youth in the water structure and the water industry. I also know someone at EPA who works on some of their water treatment funding. And, just imagine if all that money that's going out to water treatment plants, to water utilities, imagine if every one of those grantees had to think about, hey, is this water actually, are these new jobs that are being created going to opportunity youth, or are they going to the same kind of people who have been getting those jobs? Hey, am I making sure that with this funding and these grantees that they're making sure that there are job training programs to actually help grow our own future water professionals? So those are the kind of like really intersectional kinds of systems type questions that a lot of these laws really challenge us to ask about. So all that to say, that brings me to the second bullet here, which is that the executive order that created Justice 40 told the Council on Environmental Quality, which I had heard of, but am just now learning anything about, to create a scorecard that all of these agencies are supposed to be measuring their progress against. So this Council on Environmental Quality, all these agencies have identified programs, and now theoretically they're going to be saying that CEQ is going to create this scorecard that's going to help these agencies measure whether they're doing what they're supposed to. Oh yeah, so Kathy's, yes, pulling up the page there. So they have a request out for comment on basically like, what should this scorecard look like? What should the vision for this scorecard be? What framework? And how should we be engaging the public around this scorecard? And they extended the comment period on this. So we have until November 3rd to, you see the green button at the top there, submit a formal comment. So basically what I've put in the slide deck is a link to a Google Doc that I've started just to give you some language if you want to submit a comment on this that you can use. And again, just to, I'll open it up for questions here because I know this sounds really in the weeds, but we basically are, what we're basically trying to do is shape how the Council on Environmental Quality, how they create this environmental justice scorecard that lots of different agencies are going to use to measure whether they're advancing environmental justice. So there are a few things that I think we can really contribute that I'm not seeing other commenters really directly talk about, which is being really clear about what environmental justice looks like, what it really means to center people with lived experience in agency decision-making, which we know federal agencies are not super good at. You've kind of been hearing about that already. And another thing that I think is important is making sure that all agencies are accountable to all of the measures in the scorecard. So one of the neat things about this Justice 40 and executive order is that it actually says, it doesn't just say, hey, measure how you're doing in ensuring, communities are more energy efficient or they have clean drinking water or whatever. It says, environmental justice includes affordable housing. It includes workforce development and job training. So to the kind of water example I was using earlier, I think the EPA should be held responsible for trying to increase the supply of affordable housing and workforce development if we're really serious about what environmental justice means. So that's some of the kind of themes that I've worked into this language. To be honest, I'll probably keep adding on to the language there and make it a little more specific over the next couple of days. But if you think your only time that you're going to focus on this is right now, I'll put the link to the Google Doc in the chat. Feel free to go in there and just take that suggested language, make it your own, and submit it as a comment. The way these kind of things work, and this is true across federal agencies, is that when a federal agency asks for comments, they actually, by law, the agency staff have to consider, have to take a look at all the comments that come in. So they have to read your comment, which is great. And often they'll respond formally to your comment. The thing that it is really important for you to customize that language to talk about your own organization, your own experiences, the experiences of young people that you work with. Because if we're just submitting a bunch of identical comments, obviously they're not going to give the same weight to all of those as if each of these comments are different. But I just wanted to draw your attention to that. This is like a little opportunity to kind of, give a little nudge to possibly a lot of funding across a lot of different agencies. So that's kind of the way that I think that's going to be a big part of kind of all of our work over the next year or so, as all of these different laws get implemented, is there's a bunch of different agencies trying to figure out how to make these funding streams and laws work. And I think we're all going to be kind of looking for little ways to nudge some of these agencies in new ways. Okay, I'm tired of hearing myself talk. What kind of questions do we have? What's on the Jamboard? What's in the chat? Or folks can raise their hands, since we have a lot of folks on the call here. Yes, and only 19 public comments have been made on this so far. I think it was Kathy. You originally shared the. I think you originally. Drew my attention to this. It's kind of surprising how few comments have been made. possibly because it's the Council on Environmental Quality, and a lot of not many folks engage with them regularly. Let's see, any questions from folks, or questions about any of the many many things that we've covered here so far? Let's see, have we covered all the questions that are on the Jamboard?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know we've been throwing a lot of links everywhere.
I know.
So I just want to take a deep breather and remind folks that if you registered for this webinar, you
Yeah.
will get the recording and links. And this one is just a good place that has most of everything that we talked about, including deadlines and eligibility information.
Yes. And feel free to ask questions about, just saying, what is a notice of funding opportunity, or did you actually say what the deadline was there? I was actually genuinely asking Mary Ellen, or Joanne, that if the NOFO would come out. I actually had no idea.
And these are great questions, especially as we continue to track all the public information that's coming out. And we also welcome just further questions, feedback, and ways that we can strengthen communications and the education of materials as things come out from all of the agencies. So appreciate folks, as you think through whether you've applied, whether you know of folks who've applied, whether you're planning to apply, to just really be in partnership and community with us as we work to shape the implementation of these federal funds, and also the scorecard, thanks to all the amazing work that Thomas and Kathy have led.
Yeah, and the last thing
Yes.
I'll say is that young people have been asking for this money and more. And so it's really, we're at a critical time to make sure that this money goes to the communities that need it most. And that's what makes this set of 90 plus folks on the call unique, is making sure this money is implemented in the right way.
Oh, great question in the chat from Kelly. Is there TA to help groups apply? And this varies widely by funding stream, but does anybody want to jump in with whether any of the funding streams we've talked about so far has any TA to help people apply?
I can share from the perspective of the EPA. There is going to be technical assistance. So if you remember back to the slide with the regional offices and how each of the regions are divided, just encourage folks to think about that, as well as two other things that I'll lift up. One is that there is actually a grant that's out for the EPA to dedicate technical assistance to local organizations too, to help in that effort. And I know as they're continuing to staff up the new programmatic office of environmental justice and external civil rights, they're going to be looking to make sure that there are more staff that are available to help with TA moving forward, whether that's grant applications, general questions. Having combed through and staying up to date with their website, I will say they're great at sharing that information on their resources through social media, through their networks, through their newsletters. So if folks are interested, as you think about that particular climate provision area and the environmental justice block grant, I encourage you to, one, stay in touch with us. We'll definitely continue to share our contact and information in the chat, and then also comb through some of the EPA's resources too.
Yes, those community engagement calls are really helpful. And also, Kelly, you made a great point if you're a community-based organization or you have limited experience going for federal funds, those regional offices for these different agencies, their job is to be responsive to you. So that map that Joanne had up for EPA's regions, which are similar to DOL's regions, reach out to those regional offices, and they should be able to at least answer basic questions about how to go for some of this and point you to any technical assistance that's available. What other questions do folks have? I'm not seeing any other ones in the chat. We could also shift to our kind of open discussion and announcements period. I don't know, what do my co-hosts think?
That would be great.
Okay. And actually, as the local and success stories, are there any parameters that Hannah at OPE gave in terms of success stories she's looking for, or are there particular, are these all the parameters that we have on what she's looking for?
It's a great question. So I'll share it in this way. So as the White House is thinking about ways to lift up hyper-localized stories in terms of the implementation of federal funds, they have had a focus on particular states. In terms of like format and how to share, I think the best way in my mind is like, as folks are thinking about your networks and your communities and the implementation of funds, please feel free to fill out the Jamboard and connect with us individually. And we're happy to share those stories up with Hannah at the Office of Public Engagement. It can be by email, it can be in the form of a one-pager, it can be in the form of the letter. Really, the parameters are very informal at this stage. And then perhaps we can think about having a centralized hub of all the stories moving forward, such as the great microsite that Caitlin has built out on our team. And I see a hand from Eve. Eve, did you have a question for us?
Oh, not a question. Sorry, it was an update.
Sure, thanks.
No, feel free to, go for it.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. My name is Eve Levinson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm 22 years old. I am one of the co-founders and leaders of the Youth and Gov Coalition, which is a coalition of 100+ youth-led and youth-serving organizations, some of which I recognize here on the call, who have come together since this administration was elected to push for a proposal. Thank you, Thomas. To push for a proposal for increased representation of young Americans. We define young Americans as 40 and under in the federal government and substantive personnel positions. So our proposal is really three-pronged, and which I'll get into in a moment, but there are really two ways that we're pushing to have it be enacted. One is we do have a draft executive order, and then in an ideal world, obviously the president would have signed it and it would have been able to be enacted, but we know that that's a little less likely to happen. So we've been working with allies in Congress to be able to get funding appropriated. And so we sort of need to continue to push both to ensure that it is a priority in the fiscal year 23 budget, but also will be an expanded priority in the fiscal year 24 budget. And then also making sure that there are folks inside of the White House that are aware of the proposal, are excited about the proposal, and are going to push to make sure those funds are actually used. So the proposal was based off of, I know that in the past there have been different sort of variations of pushes to get young folks involved. We think, hopefully why we think it might be able to work this time is again, because we really have sort of what we see as the whole youth space behind it, since we do have both Gen Z groups, millennials, and more adult groups that are youth serving. The proposal is three-pronged. So one is to create an Office of Young Americans. This was sort of styled after the Office of Neighborhood and Faith Engagement, which we know is able to be successfully funded and used. And so we would ask that the office would be led by a director of Young American Engagement who would sit on the Domestic Policy Council and work with the NEC and the NSC to have secondly, to empower young Americans in existing staff roles. So there are a few key ways that we suggest doing this. One is dedicating a staffer within PPO to hiring of young Americans. The second is conducting a federal youth inclusion assessment. So we really have written proof of what are the ways that are working best of both hiring young Americans, but also engaging young Americans. And then third is to create an interagency working group. We know that that exists sort of on the career side, but not on the political side with the interagency working group on youth programs, but it doesn't really exist with folks on the political appointee side. And then the third is to create a Young Americans Advisory Council. I think, and thank you for inviting me to the call, Thomas, and it was great to listen, and I hope to be able to join some other calls. I think like the work that you all are doing is great. We also we want to make sure there are more young people in the government who can be doing this as well and who can be working with those folks, as I'm sure you all understand the importance of. So if any of you are interested in joining the Youth and Gov Coalition, we will be having another big coalition meeting after the election. Obviously, a lot of groups also do youth vote work, so they're a little focused on that right now. And we're going to be doing another big push when the fiscal year 23 budget comes to a vote. We did successfully get included in the House passed version of the fiscal year 23 budget in the report language to support the creation of an Office of Young Americans and also to support the creation the federal youth inclusion assessment. So the path from here sort of is we make sure that stays in there in the Senate and that folks in OMB and across the White House know that's there and want to implement it, but we know we're probably going to need to get stronger language in the fiscal year 24 budget that allocates a specific amount of money to make that happen. But would really love any of you all to help. The coalition is a true coalition, doesn't necessarily have a ton of resources behind it. And so any group that really wants to push anything or champion it or own it or do an event or a push or anything, just happy to do that. And I will share a bunch of links and my contact information, but excited to have gotten to connect with you all. And I know the call probably supposed to end, but I could answer questions now, or you can text or email me.
No, we actually set aside 90 minutes for the conversation today because we knew we were going to be going long. Eve, can we, in a real how the sausage is made moment, I didn't know about the inclusion assessment. Could you send that to me? I'll put it in that CEQ, or I'll reference it in that CEQ template comment I was talking about.
Yeah,
earlier.
definitely. So we don't have necessarily what that would look like. We have sort of laid out what it would be. I can find the language from the draft DO from it, but it basically would be something that would be conducted. I think the way we laid it out, like the suggestion would be to have OPE and PPO like oversee it and then like sort of give like, I think it was 100 days or 150. Sorry, the details are getting lost in my brain because what we wrote in the draft DO is not exactly the language that then got included in the appropriation bill. So, and I mean, the details are important, but so let me just find that part specifically.
Send me both versions. That'd be great. And I mean, this is another, just to keep connecting things, like a big theme of a lot of these. I mean, Justice 40 that I was talking about explicitly, says that federal agencies should find new ways to include people from disadvantaged communities in decision-making, because we know that the federal government isn't doing that very well. And like the Department of Transportation this month actually released a report on, I think it was called like public involvement in decision-making or something, where it was still phrased in this very kind of one-sided way. It wasn't actually anything about sharing decision-making or proactively engaging people from marginalized communities. So, I mean, this is a big learning curve, but I think there is a lot of awareness among some of our allies that this is something that everyone can be doing better at. Oh yes, okay. Lots of links in the chat. Okay. Yes. Does any? And I guess and actually, yeah. I think a lot of people on the call probably are familiar with Eve and Youth and Gov. But does anybody have any quick questions about what the heck she's talking about?
Thank you so much, Eve. I only wrote down 2 other prongs. I feel like I'm missing one. And it was Office of Young Americans, the Young Americans Advisory Council. There was one more?
Yeah. So the other prong is empowering young Americans in existing positions. And so that encompasses dedicating a staffer in the Presidential Personnel Office for the hiring and placement of young Americans, the Federal Youth Inclusion Assessment, and an interagency working group.
Perfect. And thank you for everything that you all are doing in Youth and Gov and all of the great information.
Great. Right. Let's see. Do we have, I think we had a couple of announcements from our end that we definitely wanted to make, but maybe let's see, any other announcements from, yeah, what kind of announcements do we have out there? Joanne, do we have any RYC announcements?
We can share our action alert that's been circulating. We've been calling for increases in federal funding for a number of opportunity youth programs. And so as folks are connecting with your legislators, maybe even as they are campaigning ahead of midterms, one of the things and key priority areas that we're continuing to lift up is to make sure that opportunity youth programs are receiving beyond just level funding, which a lot of them have in the last couple of years. So I'm happy to drop that into the chat, and please feel free to also share with your networks.
And I see Martha put a question in the chat about ARPA, and I appreciate it. In all honesty, that is the question. That's the $64 million question, or whatever we would say. As Thomas mentioned, and there are probably folks on this call who can answer this even better than I can, but the question is there still room to move ARPA? Because the spending goes through 2025, I believe, there are a lot of ways in which some of the flexible funds and grants may have opportunities to move and direct to older youth as we go forward. I'll drop the link in again and overwhelm you even more with links, but the video from the recording from the June 29th webinar, there's a quick toolkit and transcript that we had our friend Kylie at the Children's Funding Project really go through. What are the opportunities to move and how do those continue as the funding? We've gone through the initial round of most of the allocation deadlines, but there's still a lot of movement possible in the next couple of years as things are really getting spent. So the best and probably least satisfying answer I can give is we need to still be tracking the money and trying to move it locally and in our states. And there's the Children's Funding Project and this coalition of folks are really working to try to figure out when and where those opportunities might arise. That is another big request for all of us here too. If you're finding, or if you hear about ways that there's opportunities to influence which nonprofits can access which grants or how the grants are being spent and defined, please share, because other communities, other states can benefit from that. There's a lot of there's a certain amount of learning as we go, because this is a really sort of new and big different approach. I don't know if anyone else has other really more specific and concrete information about deadlines to move ARPA or any opportunities to move ARPA.
I think you really can. I put a link to the Brookings NLC tracker that says only 50.9% of funding has been budgeted. I know in a lot of, with a lot of these funding streams, they have different timelines, but in a lot of cases, it's like states have to, allocate or kind of say what they're going to spend money on by a certain time. But that just means they're saying, we're going to spend $50 million on a school attendance initiative or something like that. It doesn't mean that, it means they're going to continue to determine who they're actually giving money to, what that initiative is actually going to look like. And they might even continue to change the direction of it over the next, few years or whatever the time span of the allocation is. And they're almost all multi-year allocations. So there's a lot of times it's really going into that tracker, seeing if your locality is in there, if there's something relevant to you, and then finding a contact and being like, hey, if you haven't heard about it already, finding out, hey, what's going on with this? is there some way to continue to influence this? And you might also find that your state hasn't fully, is still working through how they're going to use some of these dollars, because they're very flexible. Not a satisfying answer. Which is kind of why we've been falling back on these success stories of kind of like, we can't really go in and help everybody apply for money, but we're trying to surface these success stories as inspiration for things that you can go after. What other questions and announcements do we have? Let's see, I know there's a P3. Is the P3 opportunity still open? I was going to say I had that up in one of my browser windows here, and I'm not finding it, but I can add that to the. I'll add that link if it's relevant to the slides. Any other questions? I have a cheesy one that I can do at the end whenever we're ready for it. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any hands. We've been at this for 75 minutes. I'm happy to announce that, well, as many of you know, I got married a little over a week ago, and my wife, Judy, has informed me that on our wedding website, you can now see the recording of the ceremony from a couple of weeks ago. I see, some of the folks here were watching it on Zoom. You can go watch the recording on the website. This is our extremely 2022 wedding vibes.
We love Thomas. Not cheesy at all.
And let's get that slide up for the next. I think our next call is like sometime after Thanksgiving. Hopefully we'll know more stuff about all of this. Kathy's been diligently adding links to the slide. Yes, our fill out that feedback form. Our next conversation is November 27th. Same time and place. Keep adding things to that Jamboard, especially the stories. All of our contact information's there. Please really do reach out to any of us with questions, comments, etc. Yeah, and I mean, big props to Kathy for playing the great music before we got on here, sharing screen, running the slide deck, even keeping up with the different websites that people were referencing. Kathy, stop sharing your screen and get on camera here. Come on.
Hey y'all, thanks for being here.
Yes, amazing job, Kathy, holding everything together. Okay, well, if that's we don't have anything else. Thanks for sticking with us today. I know we went over an hour, but I'm really grateful for all of you. And yeah, please do stay in touch and see you next month.